state perspective, it's rare to get the chance to interact with counterparts in other states. We have a lot to learn from one another, and the opportunities to get together like this are few and far between. So on that very sort of narrow focus, it's a great chance to gather for 2 days. But we also don't always get the opportunity to meet with members of industry and sort of thought leaders in this area all at the same time. We are lucky in the state. Vendors certainly approach us. We do have access to thought leaders in other settings, but to see all these people together assembled for 2 days on this topic is very rewarding.
Has there been any specific high points or anything that you'd like to share?
High points are hard to pick out of such a good conference. I think for me, it's been really the interaction with some of the other state officials. Secretary of Health and Human Services in Missouri and I had a very good conversation about where they're trying to take their Medicaid, state Medicaid HIP plan and how they want to pattern their incentive payments to providers around e-health record adoption. We're obviously, just like every other Medicaid agency, working on that plan as well, so it's good to sort of have the open exchange of ideas. I also thought it was very useful to hear Dr. Blumenthal's real-world examples as a clinician about how health information technology helped him make better decisions, and also what his experience was in learning to embrace that technology. That's very useful to me as a payer in trying to incent providers to adopt this technology, to hear from him what it was like to try and do that and what the benefits were for him once he became familiar with the technology.
Great. Could you give me a thumbnail sketch of kind of what we're talking about here?
Sure. I think really what we're talking about is taking the healthcare system to the next paradigm. We talk a lot about technology, but that's really, I think, just an enabling tool. What we are hoping to do, I believe, is significantly improve healthcare outcomes by making people healthier and reduce costs in the healthcare system. Now, you can reduce costs by making people healthier, obviously. You can also reduce costs by eliminating errors, by better aligning treatments to conditions, and by reducing duplication of treatments that are offered to people. And, the technology that's being discussed in the end case scenario allows a treating physician to sort of know all the relevant things about a person who comes in for a visit so that they can offer the best care necessary for that person without reordering tests or without going down a path that's really not fruitful for treatment. So the presence of complete information, I think, is really what we're talking about. And that is true on the patient side as well. We heard from a number of people at the conference that simply the act of giving people information about their own health drives better healthcare outcomes. So if I'm a person, I want to be more engaged in my own healthcare, which, for the past, 25 years, people have been sort of passive recipients of healthcare delivered to them. But the healthcare system has changed significantly in those past 25 years. The number of diagnoses, treatments, drugs available just exploded, which is a lot more information for doctors to have to manage, and a lot more potential treatments for a person to have to understand are available to them and what they could mean to patients. So the presence of better information, which makes any market work better, is going to be important both for patients and for doctors. So it should really transform how they interact with one another. And certainly from a payer side, which is what Medicaid is, it will allow us to better understand what we're getting for what we pay for. We pay right now, generally speaking, payers pay on a fee-for-service sort of basis. Doctor renders a certain number of procedures, we pay a price for those procedures. Where I think everybody wants to be is paying for outcomes. We want to pay doctors for making people healthier and keeping them that way. The current emphasis on services doesn't really allow us to really get to that in a really meaningful way. Once you make information about actual clinical conditions and outcomes available to physicians and to payers in the appropriate way, we can begin to start to pay for outcomes and not for how many procedures did you deliver. And that's really important for payers because there's a big trend towards changing how we pay. Just what I was just talking about, the notion of integrated or global payments and accountable care organizations. If you want those payments, those rolled-up payments, to be formed on the basis of outcomes and not simply, well, let's roll up what all those fee-for-service costs used to be and come up with a general number, you have to have information about outcomes. Otherwise, all you'd be left with is, we used to pay this doctor for all these procedures over a period of time, let's just lump it into one payment. You have to start to get enough information to payers so they can understand what are the outcomes that we're actually getting, and how can we design our payments to encourage better outcomes being delivered by providers, and to discourage less good outcomes, and ultimately pay less for less good outcomes or pay more for better outcomes, which is a very different way of paying for healthcare than we do today. So that's what I think this whole thing is really all about.
That's great, yeah, because it's we're in a state where not only is it difficult to figure that out, but it's also difficult for the providers to provide care that gives better outcomes, because financially it doesn't make sense.
So I'll take a story from Dr. Atul Gawande's latest book, The Checklist Manifesto. He talks about an experiment that Children's Hospital Boston did. They see a lot of kids present in the emergency department with asthma, and they wanted to do something to really reduce the incidence of asthma. Now, they get paid to give a treatment in the emergency room, but they said, we're going to just figure out what is it going to take to reduce the incidence of asthma in the emergency room. And they went out, they went into people's homes, and they figured out that, among other things, if you give vacuum cleaners to the parents, they will keep the house cleaner, dust will be down, kids will get less asthma, fewer kids in the emergency department. That's great. Except that the main source of inpatient admissions for Children's Hospital Boston is kids with asthma in the emergency room. So the revenue model for Children's Hospital is built upon sort of not very good outcomes being achieved, because payers, quite frankly, don't pay Children's Hospital to go give vacuum cleaners to parents. We pay them to put the kid on the nebulizer when he comes in with an asthma attack. So there's a real transformation in how we need to decide